Thank you, Karen, and thanks to all of you for being here. I will admit I am curious about why people show up at the end of a workday for a session on curiosity. When I think about what is in the news about education or the crisis on test scores or something like that, it's not because children's curiosity scores are going down. It seems to be this thing that happens in learning that doesn't necessarily get much attention, and yet it is so essential to who children are and how they learn. And I it's almost I'm almost a little bashful about saying that we're going to think about supporting children's curiosity here. It's sort of like saying we're going to support children in being hungry. They just are. And what I want to do with you is help us notice the power of that curiosity and think about how we can at points just not get in the way. And then at other points, what we can do to sustain it and support it. Because curiosity, while children are born with it, that doesn't mean that they will be allowed to have that flourish. And we can make a difference on that. So I'm delighted to be here with you. Jonathan Fribley in Minnesota. I've met some of you before. Some of us are working together for the first time. Um, let's make sure we give a shout out to Karen Amundsen and everyone at the center in Illinois who helped make this possible for us. Let me just describe a couple things about our work together. First is I always hope for an informal enough format that if you have questions and comments, you can put those in the chat or come off mute even at times and share some of those. This is a dialogue. You also work with curious children, so we can do this together. Um, you do have a few handouts. One of those is a set of the PowerPoints. And so you have everything I'm going to put up. The other one, the first one, though, is perhaps more valuable for our work here. It's a two-page handout titled Responding to Curiosity in a Powerful Interaction. And it really sketches out all the big ideas of what we're going to be thinking about together. So if you'd like something that sort of gives you the architecture of our conversation, if that's helpful, that first handout is the one to use. There's also one more, a single page called Productive Questions that we'll think about near the end of our session. So you have those all as tools. I think I'll just frame our discussion here as that, we're going to think some about why curiosity matters and how children do curiosity, and then really focus in on what we can do to support children in maintaining and using that curiosity for learning. Before we do that, though, I want to take a moment to attend to our sort of presence here. We do this I usually take a little bit of time to pause at workshops for us to sort of collect ourselves, just because that's a healthy human and mind habit. But that will end up being, I think, especially important today as we think about joining children with curiosity. So let me give you just a moment to pause, maybe take a breath if that's helpful for you, and just notice how you are. Notice what else is showing up for you. Maybe you have a bunch of things buzzing in your head right now about things that you were doing, things you will be doing, things you're concerned about. I'd encourage you to notice those because those same kind of things will be buzzing when you're interacting with children, and they get in the way, right, of us having the interactions we want to have. So let's notice those and be here. All right, so this is actually the third in a series of webinars, and for some of you that will make sense and be valuable, and we will make reference to that. For others of you for whom this is the first time you're joining us, no worries. We will we will scaffold your learning, to borrow a term. Our essential structure here is that we are using a sort of interaction tool known as Powerful Interactions, which I will be more specific about in a little bit, and investigating some sort of different ways into supporting children's learning using that tool. We've thought some about the basics of powerful interactions and looked at relationships. We've thought some about powerful interactions and supporting language. And now we're going to look at tuning in interactions to really center on children's curiosity. And we're going to use a couple questions to get at that and use those to sort of bring us to a few big ideas. One of those questions is just for us to be aware of how curiosity affects learning, and especially affects learning in school. All right. And kind of the big idea there is curiosity is a really powerful learning tool, as we'll mention. Um, the second kind of big question, it really has two parts. One is how, in creating a culture of curiosity, we can simply join children in their curiosity. And there's some virtue to simply not getting in the way and of being curious with children. And that is not a given in a busy early childhood environment. So we'll think about how we can tune in and do that. And then the other piece that we're going to look at is what can we do to use those curious moments to really extend children's thinking and learning? Because we can bring value. We can ask smart questions, we can notice details, we can support their enthusiasm. There are things that we can do that help children maintain and extend their learning in moments of curiosity. So let's take a moment and notice our own. Um, Different people are curious in different ways and about different things. Um, I'm kind of a nature guy. The idea of seeing a whale like this is absolutely amazing for me, but maybe that's not you. Maybe you are curious about what will happen if you experiment with a new recipe, or curious about something from a hobby, or curious about other people and wondering about their motivations and thoughts. Let me just take a moment and invite people. Oh, Karen just told me I'm not sharing my PowerPoint. My apologies. We missed out on that somehow. Let me put that up. Wonder what happened. I'm curious about that, but you know what? We're going to just fix it. Oh, you know what? Let me stop for just a moment and try that again. There we go. Okay. All right. I'm curious how you're all doing, and hopefully, well, give me a moment to get this set up properly. My apologies there, folks. All right. So now we're all literally on the same slide page. Let me just invite folks to take a moment and think about what you're curious about. And if you have things that light you up, that you like to explore, investigate, nobody has to tell you to do it. You just think, oh, I'd like to poke around in that. Let's have a few folks share some items in the chat. Let's just see some of the things that light people up. New recipes, nature, national parks. Okay. Outside, gardening. I'm guessing it's a little cold in Illinois right now for gardening and the beach, but we can still go hiking. All right. Family tree history. Thanks, Mary. Yeah. Love to investigate the music industry. What's it like to be part of it? Look at this. And yeah, the human behavior, the psychology of people, what motivates them, painting, historical fiction, animals, cooking healthy, ancient history. And Sandy does an LOL after ancient history. Nobody needs to uh, justify what they're curious about. If it lights you up, it takes you in and you learn, right? Learning a new skill, cooking, new places, finding Easter eggs in movies. Look at this. There are a couple people who put some related things, but we have everything from ancient history to Easter eggs in movies to cooking, don't we? So all kinds of things. And um, so in simply thinking about working with children, they're probably walking in with lots of interests too, right? Some of which we will share and some of which we won't. New dishes to eat. Thanks, Carla. Being very clear about not cooking them. Much appreciated. We can get somebody else here to do, maybe we can get Beth or LaShawn to do some cooking for you. Um, so we have, I hope that as you name that thing that you're enthusiastic about, that you're curious about, you can get that just sort of that little buzz that goes along with that as you think about that, right? And I want you to remember that and hold on to that, that we've got this huge range of different things that people are interested in. But for all of us, when we step into that space, there's something that happens when we do, right? It's energizing, it's exciting, it's delightful. We get curious, all right? So let's play around with that little sort of with that experience. I want to give you a photo here. I'm just going to ask you to sort of notice what you see. Go ahead and share any comments in the chat. What do you notice there? What do you wonder? How are you feeling? How did the man get in? There's a guy in the water, and how did he get in there? Tammy, would not every 4-year-old in your classroom have that question too, right? What's he do? It looks like oh, okay, so you're imagining that experience. Kyla says, a man in trouble and people just passing by. How did he get in there and why? Why isn't anyone helping him? So we've got this like this curiosity about like what happened that he's in there. We've got this curiosity that he's okay. Laura, no, it's not AI generated. And if you want to do a back search on the image, you can find it. All right. But we're just going to be curious. All right. Maybe he fell in. Okay. Anything else anybody notices and wonders about here? Yeah. That would be my initial question. Oh, good. Yeah. Is it AI generated? You never know now, do you? Oh, whoa. Rachel's looking in the background there and looking up at the clouds in the sky, I'm assuming. That's something to wonder about, isn't it? I'm wondering about too about all those, like, it looks like there's a whole lot of motorcycles or motorbikes. Oh, I hope his mouth is closed. Yeah, Johnny, thank you. Okay. All right. Is the water going to harm him? Looks really dirty. Yeah. How did that hole get there? Is he hiding? He could be hiding, couldn't he? All right. So, um, I want to just highlight that you just had an experience, at least related to something that our children experience here. I put you into a situation that you don't know very much about. Now, nobody here is 3 or 4, so you have a lot of life experience, and I could have shown you a whole lot of pictures and they wouldn't necessarily have evoked a whole lot of curiosity on your part because you have so much background knowledge. But this is kind of the situation kids experience like lots of times in the day. You show some illustration in a children's book, and they're kind of going, oh, never seen anything like that before. So this is kind of the moment, right? This is part of what goes on here. And I want to notice all the different ways your curiosity played out. Some of you looked at details and like, what's the weather going on here? Some of you are concerned about the person. Some of you are wondering about like how this happened. There's all kinds of questions to explore here. And like, there's not a right one, right? All of those can bring us information and understanding to the point where, here's one of Albert Einstein's more famous quotes. I'm neither clever nor especially gifted. I'm only very, very curious. So I think where that brings us is to think some about how curiosity makes a difference. And so let's go right in and look at children. I kind of love both of these photos. The child on the left, we've all seen that look, right? On an infant or a toddler, that intensity, right? That stare. And then This is not the current Pope, but there's a child being held by the Pope. And if you're a little kid and you get held by the Pope, what's the good move? Check under that wild hat, right? What's up with that hat? Never seen one of those before. Go for it, right? So young children, they're born with curiosity, right? Infants, they turn towards noises, they stare at areas of high contrast, they explore. And in fact, if we have an infant or a toddler who's not curious, right? Parents out there, how would you, if like your toddler one morning wakes up and they're just not poking around in things and curious about things, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? You're concerned, right? Is there something wrong? Are they sick? Yeah, they may be sick. Yeah, it's just what they do, right? They may be sick. An infant that's not curious at birth, like shortly after birth, that's part of the diagnosis for failure to thrive, right? Curiosity is so hardwired into human behavior that it's often considered as basic a drive as hunger. Okay. Like when we think about what are the things that are innate in humans, you're born hungry, right? You're born curious. All right. So you're not, there's not a lot of things we are born with, but that's absolutely one. All right. And in fact, the definition, one of the definitions of curiosity is the intrinsic motivation to acquire new knowledge. It's not just the motivation, it's the intrinsic, like the drive. Nobody has to give you a reward to exercise curiosity, right? If someone has to give you a skittle for it, it's not curiosity, right? Curiosity is when we just like want, when we're just engaged in doing it because it is satisfying on its own to do that exploring. Um, the William James, the philosopher, described it as the impulse towards better cognition. Well, we're in the cognition business, right? So, like the impulse towards better thinking, that seems like that would be something that would be useful for us, right? So, let's just take a moment. And I've been doing a lot of talking. Let's see if you folks can just share um, some of your experience. How do you see children being curious? What have you noticed lately? What's a moment when a child's exercised their curiosity? Asking questions, when they find a bug outside, picking up items, sometimes picking up items we don't want them to pick up, right, Beth? Looking at a stick and then picking up the stick and seeing everything you can do with it, right? Questions, looking around. Oh boy, look at all the folks saying questions. Yeah, nature walk, noticing things on that nature walk. Okay, absolutely. All right. Staying focused. Okay, so when we're curious, we keep exploring, don't we? Trying to take things apart, manipulating them, pointing. So, like they point to share attention. When they're curious about something, they want us to join them oftentimes, right? And I want to just highlight how many folks here have mentioned asking questions, and we're going to have a little bit more to say about that. But that is like one of the really powerful moves of the preschooler, right? Pointing, gesture, attentiveness. Okay. Letting the question to build on the Rachel, that idea of like that series of questions that can come from children. And Lula, yes, that exploring of space. So we see children, like we've got these moves they make. They're attentive, they're focused, they want to keep exploring, they'll be persistent, they use their verbal skills. Sandy mentions asking why, all of these kinds of questions that we see preschoolers ask. They will try to get adults to join them in their attention, right? The pointing, the just gesturing, and they will use movement to manipulate things, to change angles on things, to get closer to things. There is a kind of wonderful book on young children and curiosity. Author Susan Engel. I've got the copy handy here. Called The Hungry Mind. And this is a quote from it. A couple quotes. One is, Curiosity is the engine that fuels learning. Kind of love that. And then, here's the detail, all right? And we're going to actually get more specific, but we know from study after study that when kids are interested in materials, they learn it better, they learn it longer, and they learn more information. Okay, so let's sort of put the scientific brain terms on that, okay? We see three big impacts with curiosity on children's brains, okay? One is motivation, all right? The pleasure and reward, we're going to mention those later on. The curiosity literally activates the pleasure in food, okay? Sex, curiosity, all right? Things that motivate, get those pleasure and reward centers going, all right? Curiosity also activates areas of the brain that and I'll sort of name some of those later on that especially move memories from short-term memory into long-term memory. And they also assist children with attention, as you folks have described. As Tammy notes that they've learned that you can find things on your phone. At this age, they still need help with from us with those phones, though, right? But so they'll come to us oftentimes. So what I just described there shows up on fMRIs in the brain, and specifically, I would highlight here the nucleus accumbens of the brain, which is the reward circuits. Okay, and the connectivity with the hippocampus is the connecting of the short-term and the long-term brain, short-term and long-term memories. So when children are curious, they are literally in brain states that promote learning, okay? And I want to note that little bottom line there, improved memory for information we're curious about and incidental material. All right. So when a child is curious about that bug that they find outside, and it's a spider, all right. And so we count the legs on it, and they're very interested in watching that spider. But as you do the counting, that incidental material of the counting is also retained more powerfully than it would be if we were just reciting something off a smartboard or something, if that was more rote. Okay, so one researcher describes it like this: curiosity seems to put this brain in a state that's very conducive to learning. You could think of it as something like a vortex that draws in things that you're motivated to learn, but it draws in everything around it. Okay, so if we can join children in moments of curiosity, then other stuff sticks too. All right, we can. It's sort of. No, I was gonna. I'm not going to use that analogy. I was going to talk about like your dogs and medicine, but the other stuff's good too, right? So, but they may not be as excited about it as they are about finding what they can mix into that glue or whatever that is that they're curious about. So, um, children engage in play, as we know, and they do it in ways that promote information gain. And I think that's kind of what we've been describing. And let's name this very specifically in terms of development. Infants, we know what they do is they use their mouths, they put things in their mouths because they can't manipulate as well with their fingers yet, right? They shake things because they can do the big arm movements, right? They drop things. So they're manipulating and exploring materials, right? Toddlers, now they can move. Some of you described children moving before. By the toddler age, they can go over to investigate something, and they can put things in motion. They can throw them, they can shove them, right? And really make things move. And then you folks described that explosion that happens with preschoolers, where suddenly they can use language in all kinds of ways. And lots of you described, you said asking questions, right? So you see here, I'm going to share a little example with you here. Okay. So this is from a parent and a child, and they were reading a book about that had a picture of a whale in it, and the whale was eating. Okay? And the child says, "What's he eating?" The mom says, "Fish." "Why does he eat fish?" "Because he's hungry." "Why doesn't he eat rolls?" "Because we don't give him any." "Why don't we give him any?" "Because bakers only make rolls for people." "Why not for fishes and whales?" "Because they haven't enough flour." "Why haven't they enough?" "Because not enough wheat is grown. You know, don't you, that flour is made out of wheat?" "Oh." Right. So we go from what whales eat to like why bakers don't give way roles to what you all recognize that chain, right? Where this child asks this one question to explore something, and then they want to know the reason back behind that, and the reason back behind that, and back behind that, and suddenly we're talking about how flour is made, right? So that you know that is, yes, it's the if you give a mouse a cookie syndrome, and they're doing it verbally, absolutely. Okay, so let's explore that a little bit. You all recognize that. I have a quiz for you. All right, so here's the quiz. There's that whale. Okay, how often do preschoolers ask questions? This is actually a researched question. They've put various recording devices on young kids and recorded them in their home, and all the time is probably the correct answer, nonstop. Yeah, every 2 seconds, right? Absolutely. Yeah, you got it. So every other word. So I'm hearing both delight and perhaps a little bit of tiredness or something in there as well, right? Constantly. Okay, so the research shows that it, of course, varies by child. And in home settings, at least according to one study, the average is about 26 questions an hour. Okay. Now that varied. Some kids would only ask 10. There was another child who asked 108. So some poor parent, and I'm sure that you can sort of clock this out with your own kids. And those of you who are working in early preschool classrooms, there's at least a couple other things to note here, right? One is that you have some children who are doing this all the time, and some children who are doing it less often, right? And that's worth noticing and thinking about. And the other thing is, yeah, as Carla says, no wonder we're exhausted. I don't know how many children are in your classroom, but 16, 18, 20, whatever it is, there's only 2 or 3 adults, right? And so it actually, this becomes one of the dynamics of a classroom, is how this happens, right? So we're going to need to hang on to that. And but let's just be aware, as you folks noted, the best answers here are probably all the time, nonstop, every other word. Like this is their default setting. And I would actually kind of go back to the comment about the phone. Once children learn language, they discover that they can use adults like Google, right? If they don't know something, they can ask you, and you can expand that can expand their world. And they get at least two things out of this, right? One is that child now knows a whole lot more about whales and a whole lot more about baking and flour than they did 2 minutes ago. And what is it that most children want to learn about? Darn near everything, right? Okay. And the other thing is they got to hold an adult in an interaction. And that's one of the things that kids learn too, right? Is if I ask you questions, you'll answer them and I get to be with you. right? I get to interact with you. So there's a relationship move that's made here too, all right? Now, we're in the business of helping children learn, right? And so let's just note where all that curiosity goes. And the research on curiosity and learning in this has been, there's been any number of studies on curiosity and learning in kindergarten. And there's a clear link between kids exercising curiosity and achievement in reading and math. And I want to note that seems especially powerful for children who are from under-resourced communities. So inviting all children to be curious is powerful. And when we think of some children as, oh, we need to get these kids down to work or something like that, those children also benefit from the opportunity to be curious. All right. So curiosity does in fact show up in the standards. Okay. It's a few places in the early learning and development standards. Okay. One around language, learning new words, right? Another around science, and another around problem solving. It's in the approaches to learning standard in several places. It shows up, the word curiosity, itself shows up 15 times, and interest or interesting shows up 48 times. So we're supposed to be using it, and it shows up all over the Eckers as well. All right. So let's just pause right there. What I've tried to do is just like take a moment, well, take several moments, and give us some perspective on what's happening in children's curiosity, why it matters. And so let me just give you a moment to collect that. And as Carla says, yes, you are ChatGPT. And give you a moment to collect your thoughts. And if you have comments or questions, please feel free to go ahead and share those. Because where we're going to go next is jump into being curious with kids. So. All right, I want to offer you part of the mission statement from the school system I had the honored opportunity to work with in Washington, D.C. And I want to note a few things about it here. Well, actually, you know what? Maybe I'll just, yeah, I'll read it out loud here. We create spaces where students are curious, brainstorm, experiment, analyze, and reason. Therefore, our classrooms can get loud and messy because when children are talking and engaging in hands-on experiences, they are thinking. Anything anybody wants to notice about that? Let me just give you a moment there. All right, so here's what we got. When kids are doing all that curiosity stuff, they're thinking and learning. And so what I want to suggest is that, when we see that look in their eyes, when we see that persistence in manipulating something, when we're asked that seventh question, they are saying, I want to learn. Okay. And so us noticing that and stepping into it then is what we do. Okay. Oh, look at this. Thanks for some comments. Kyla says, I think sometimes people who do not understand how classrooms work think that when kids are loud and messy that it's not proper. It's absolutely proper. I appreciate you naming that, Kyla, because like in this program, they very explicitly named that so that we could all sort of hold on to that, right? Okay. And so let me just invite this for a moment. Um, I've got that question there, and obviously we're going to discuss it, but when you see children are curious, what are some of your thoughts about how we can support them? When we go home messy, it's been a really good day because you've explored so much. So one way we can support children's curiosity is making space for mess and loudness, right? Okay. That's there's a providing materials to explore related to what they're interested in. Okay. Showing interest by making a comment, expanding off what they tell us, asking questions, interaction. So we've got some sort of, I want to call it almost permission giving, right? We can allow our rooms to be messy. We can allow them to be loud. Okay. We have some, Cheryl describes sort of an environment that invites curiosity, right? By having materials for exploring. And then Tammy and Katie and Claudia all invite us into interactions, thinking about how can we interact in ways that promote curiosity. All right, so that seems like three really solid areas. Claudia, thank you for that. Exposure to new things. You Yeah, you don't know what you're interested in until you get a chance to encounter it. And young children tend to have pretty broad, they have not developed the same filters we have for the most part. There may be some things they love, but there aren't very many things that they wouldn't poke around in, right? So I think what I'd like to do is to take us into an interaction and do a little bit of thinking about what we see in children and what we can do as adults. So I want to show you um, an interaction here in a classroom where they have some caterpillars in with some milkweed in a terrarium, and just the adult, the educator, and the children, just a short interaction. And I want to just invite you to um, see what you notice that are kind of signs that the children are curious. And then, especially, what do we notice that the educator is doing to support their curiosity? And I need to do a little bit of cultural framing here. This video is actually from a classroom in Hawaii, and you'll notice a couple things. One is the teacher is referred to as auntie. She is not their biological aunt. That is a term of honor that in the culture in this classroom. So she's not their aunt as others of us might think of that term. And you will also hear her referring to the sort of how do we show the caterpillars aloha, which is, of course, part of the ethic of how we treat other beings. And so that once again is specific to not a term I would use, but one that is appropriate for these children and this educator. So let's see what the children do to be curious, what the educator might do to support it. It takes just a second for the sound to come, so don't sweat it. It'll get there.
Auntie, one's moving. He is moving. Let's put our magnifying glass up and see where he's gonna go. Do you see it? I got, yeah. The magnifying glass makes it larger. Larger. When it's larger, you can see it. Look at this tiny one. Oh, what's the tiny one doing? What do you see? First, how come the tiny one was down here and now it's up here? He was on the bottom? Yes. How do you think he got up here? Maybe he got up here and he got over there. Oh, Auntie, what is he eating? Two. see. Four. There's one. There's four. Four on that side. Five right here. Do you see any more? No. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 you had? Six. Is there 7 or no? Let's see. How many are hanging? Let's see if there's any more ready to. Oh, 7, 8. Wait, 7. There's only 7 right up here. No. Wait, let's see. 1, 2. Wait, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4. I see one hiding under the leaf over on this side. Where? Should we turn it? Yes. Let's rotate it. Really? Watch out for the fall. There. He's hiding underneath over here. Aww. Do you see him? Auntie, look at one is already almost up from his legs. He's hanging from his legs? Look, right there. Beside the cocoon. Next to the cocoon. Yeah, he's hanging up. He's almost ready. How can you tell he's almost ready? Because he almost looks like he's almost done. Yeah, he looks like the letter J, right? He hangs up and he curls his body like the letter J. And there's 2 letters, and there's 3 letter J's. 3 letter J's here. So how do we keep them safe and show aloha to them? Put them under a leaf. Put them on, so give them lots of leaves. Maybe. Protect them.
All right. What'd you notice? They're really close. They're really focused in, aren't they? Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yeah, Beth notices this. So Cheryl, she did a great job expanding their vocabulary. Let's hang on to that. Teacher responded to the children. She responded with questions. Okay. Not exclusively, but she asked a lot of questions, didn't she? So the children are looking and interested. The educator is getting down at the child's eye level and engaging what they're interested in. One term that gets used for that is joint attention, right? They are sharing a focus, okay? Rachel says that really captured their attention. And I'm wondering if the caterpillars did, I assume, right? Okay, so Carla and Tammy both noticed that she suggested using the magnifying glass. So I want to pick up a couple things on that if I can, right? One is that she did sort of try to extend their learning, right? Tried to offer them this other way into exploring by using the magnifying glass. But then they didn't really go there, did they? And what did she do? Did she keep trying to get them to use the magnifying glass? No, she dropped it, right? And if you're thinking about who's in charge of this, it's at least half the kids, right? So she made that suggestion and offered that way in. And when kids went to counting them and noticing them in different places, she joined them in what they were interested in. Okay. So she is joining them in their attention. She's asking questions that encourage their investigation. I want to also notice that there was one point where she said, I see one hiding under the leaf. And then they turned the terrarium and noticed that. And so she actually noticed details with them too, highlighted things that maybe she hadn't and brought those to their attention. Cheryl, I want to circle back to Cheryl's comment about she did a great job expanding the vocabulary. And I'm going to actually sort of jump back here, way back, okay? This idea of curiosity as being a vortex of learning, all right? The focus of the children, like they weren't all excited because I get to learn new vocabulary today, right? They were excited because they were exploring caterpillars. And she just offered that vocabulary right in with it, right? So she took advantage of their engagement to bring in, I can't remember what the words were, but there were several. So, all right. Anything else that they talked about the shape of it. Okay. Oh, yep. Okay, the bend in the letter J. Yep. All right. So, does this look like a preschool classroom? I hope so, right? Okay. Exploring and investigating. So we've got these kids asking more questions than we can keep up with, right? I want to think with you a little bit about school and curiosity, all right? And we said that on average, at least in some research, kids were asking 26 questions an hour, some kids more, some less. Now we send kids off to kindergarten and we do some research on that. And so this one researcher did a whole series of 2-hour observations. How many questions do you think the researchers saw per hour, or per 2-hour investigation in a kindergarten classroom? Anybody want to, maybe 10, 20, 50? Five's too high. 2.36 on average. Okay. Now, it would be interesting to trace this. Like, are there more at the beginning of the year and less later on? But what happens at least in the classrooms that this individual studied, was that children learned to not ask questions. And the questions they did ask were not exploratory questions like, why don't we give rolls to whales? But instead, things like, do we get to go outside today? Can I go to the bathroom? Okay. And so, yeah. So in kindergarten, now obviously this is going to vary by kindergarten teacher, and hopefully this is not representative. Let's take it up to 5th grade. 2-hour observation periods. 0.48. Half a question every 2 hours. Yeah. So, in fact, what they saw by 5th grade was that children were actively discouraged from exploring. Okay. Here was the conclusion about 5th grade. We rarely saw children take things apart, ask questions about topics either children or adults had raised, watch interesting phenomena unfold in front of their eyes, or in any way show signs that there were things they were eager to know more about, much less actually follow up with any visible sort of investigation. Okay. Claudia, we need to help the kindergarten teacher, right? So, yeah. But so now, I mean, it doesn't have to be this way, but what I want to highlight here is that that we still have children who have not been taught that they shouldn't ask questions. We still have children that have not been taught that they shouldn't explore. All right. And our disposition, our response to their curiosity is what's key here. And so I've used this in other settings, but I think this is really important here, right? Sort of how we are is really powerful for what happens. So children are coming in curious. Are we staying curious with them? All right. And I'm delighted that Claudia is saying her kids are asking 1,000 questions. That's great. And many of you said your children are asking many, many questions. And that's totally what we want to have happen, because that puts them in a learning space, right? However, there are some challenges. I mean, frankly, there are some reasons why 5th grade teachers well, I'll give you an example actually from 5th grade, right? Was that, this is one that's quoted in the Engel book, is some children were doing a science experiment and something happened that was surprising. And the kids wanted to investigate it. And the teacher told them no, they needed to go do this other thing instead, because that's what the experiment was about. was this other thing, right? And of course, children are supposed to, learn the scientific method and learn to follow instructions and so on, right? And curiosity does get in the way sometimes, right? I'll name one, right? You've got um, well, uh, teach sixth grade and they're not interested in asking questions, okay? Um, and and Carla, um, the suggestion that I think we're arriving at here is because for many children, they've spent a lot of years not being able to, not being supported in asking those questions. Whereas, Claudia is saying here, when your table broke in second grade, the kids had a problem. Like, what happened? Let's figure this out, right? And I'll give you an example from my own classroom, all right? Years ago, back in the days when you could have animals in classrooms more readily, right? And we had a guinea pig, and the guinea pig's cage was right next to, we sat in a circle back in those days, okay? Guinea pig's cage was right next to the circle. And we were getting ready to transition to go to gym. Okay, I was team teaching with another teacher, special ed teacher, and one of the kids, the guinea pig's name was Freckles. One of the kids looks over just as we're getting ready to transition. One of the kids looks over in the guinea pig cage and says, "What's in Freckles' cage? What's that?" Well, I look over. Freckles is having babies right there, okay? The special ed teacher made it very clear it was time to transition and go to gym. We went to gym, okay? And I'm sure that, for me, that was like a heartbreaking kind of moment, right? I can remember it years later, but we are all aware, when it's time for the buses and a child has a bunch of questions or wants to explore some material, buses rule, right? And so there's a lot of pressures that can sort of nudge us out of curiosity with kids. And so I want to invite you to think about like what some of the downsides are to curiosity in our classrooms. And we've been talking about welcoming it, but a child who's taking dishes from dramatic play and putting them in the water table is being curious, right? And yet our materials are, will they be okay? And are they in the right place? And, um, there's all kinds of ways that curiosity can sort of get in the way of our plans. And so I want to just invite you to think about for a moment, there's this, Curious George was great, except that he was always getting into trouble because he was curious, right? And so uh, just take a moment and think about why or when we might experience curiosity as a problem and see if we can name some of that. I distinctly remember a child in my preschool classroom who was was taking paper and rolling it up, okay, and sticking glue on his fingers and sliding the paper on. It was very clever. He was making these really long fingernails, right? And it's like, okay, so what am I going to do with this? Jackson is really exploring, and he's got glue all over his fingers, right? So as Cheryl highlights, when curiosity makes it not safe, okay? So there's clearly lines that need to be drawn about safety, no question, okay? Put it back when they finish, okay? So we can give permission for some things if we teach children how to do them responsibly, right? So you're wanting to put the dishes in the water table. When you're finished, let's dry them off and you can put them back in dramatic play, right? So there are ways to teach some things, but like climbing on the cabinets, no. So safety is a hard no, right? Okay. I want to just encourage you to notice the times when you can like feel in yourself that static of boy, this child is, and some of it is about safety. Some of it is about like how much mess am I actually comfortable with? Okay. And and then some of it, like, oh, Katie's mentioning students can become disruptive. So we do need to, like, what they do needs to be respectful of other people, right? So thinking about what the boundaries are that are about us ensuring a learning space, right? Needs to be safe. Other children need to be able to do their work. And what are the boundaries that are about sort of maybe our own particular needs, and trying to make space where we can. I watched a teacher one time. I thought it was brilliant. Okay. It was after Halloween. Okay. And a child was at the easel, and the child had the paint and looked up at the teacher and said, "Can I paint my face?" My guess is, something had happened on Halloween. And the teacher was like, yeah, I mean, I could almost see her go, right? And what she did was she sat down with the child and they talked about what all would be involved in that and what would be involved in cleaning up. And they decided they would find another time when there would be time, and they could arrange for cleanup and some support for that. And I thought, wow, okay. So respecting their curiosity and also taking care of our own needs and the needs of other children, right? So walking both of those lines. So I want to offer this powerful interactions frame as a way for us to step into that, all right? And for those of you who are in the previous couple sessions, the idea here is we can be intentional in our interactions, all right? That we can join children in a purposeful kind of way. That the first thing that when we're joining a child is for us to like let go of that's whatever our static is. Can I be present with this child? Can I quiet my own static and adjust to fit this child? All right. And can I enjoy that? Can I join that child in curiosity? All right. And a second step then of like being with them, actually joining them and joining them in their curiosity. And as some of you pointed out, as we saw in the interactions with around the caterpillars, of being curious with the child, noticing their curiosity and joining with them. So let's see if we can do that. All right. So here's a child. I'm going to just show you a still photo. All right. Here's a child who's doing some construction with Kappa blocks. And let's imagine you're walking over to the table where some children are playing with these blocks. And here's Jeremy, and he's building with blocks. And what's something you could do or say that just shows this child that you're going to join them, that you're with them, join their play rather than um, take over. Let me just pause and I want to learn how to build something. Can you show me? And what are you making? Curiosity. So we've got sort of some very different ways in here, right? We've got some describing. Cheryl's, look at all those blocks you've used. Okay. We've got some questions that ask us very specifically to join the child's play. I want to learn to build something. Can you show me how? Can I play? Right? Okay. Can you show me how to build that? And then questions that inquire about the child's planning, right? Tell me what you're making. What are you making? Okay, so we've got some different ways in. All of those are invitations for the child to share, the student to share what they're doing, right? Okay, so now we're with them. Sarah, let's think about some ways that we can extend their learning. And there's a number of ways in, and one is to simply go into that joining and then offer encouragement, right? Verbal, nonverbal, seeing what the child's doing. I want to pay particular attention to some things that you folks did here that fit very well with this, okay? Describing what the child's doing. Look at all those blocks you used. Let's see. I wonder what that stick is doing there. Is like describing, is noticing, right? Um, Offering encouragement. Oh, look at what you built. It's gotten so tall, or whatever that might be. That gives some sort of verbal affirmation, right? Um, Commenting on the child's curiosity. I see I see you're poking in that hole with that stick. Looks like you're really exploring in there, or whatever that might be. That actually maybe even uses that word curiosity with them, or that being curious yourself, right? I want to learn how to build something. Can you show me how? All right. And what doesn't work, and what none of you offered, right, is explaining, right? Telling the child how something works is that's the end of the conversation, right? I want to highlight, actually, I'm going to slip past this for now. I want to highlight this describing the child's curiosity, all right? This picture here, these children had constructed a ramp with I'm forgetting the name of those large hollow blocks, but anyway, they constructed a ramp and they kept running trucks off of it, trucks and cars off of it, onto the next shelf, okay, and onto another ramp. And the teacher, she says, so I see you're really curious about making those trucks fly. I've noticed that you tried to make them land on the shelf. I've noticed that you've tried to make them land on another ramp. Okay. Okay. I see you're really exploring how those trucks go through the air. She just gave this whole description of the children's curiosity. Okay. And at one point, then, where they added that sloped ramp, she said, it looks like you're thinking if you have a sloped ramp, it's going to go higher. Is that right? Or go farther? And so, she's actively noticing and commenting on their curiosity. All right. So let's take a moment and go back to Jeremy and see what we might add. Anything that you might add or offer Jeremy while he's constructing with those blocks that might encourage and support his curiosity and exploration? Let's watch it again. Oh, we've got some comments now. All right. Wow, lots of interesting comments here. So I want to highlight a couple because they might be doing some things that we haven't explored quite as much. All right. I want to highlight Laura's comment. What prompted you to move the blocks with both of your hands? And a way I see what Laura, what you're doing there is you are inquiring about the child's thinking. Okay. And that's a powerful move to, in effect, make that child's thinking visible, because when they do, then of course they become aware of what they're doing and they can use that more readily for future exploration. All right. So that inviting of children to actually explain why they did something or how they did something or what they were thinking, okay, is that kind of process question is powerful for supporting kids thinking. All right. Um, Oh, Rachel, you've got another version on that here. You described, first you did some describing. I see you moving the top blocks and stacking the middle. So you're describing what you saw. And then you say, what are you thinking? Okay. So you did this thing. What's up with that, right? You did a much more detailed, specific version of that of saying, I noticed this and I want to know like what got you there? What was your thinking? I want to also note in particular a couple comments, a couple of the first comments from Tammy and Cheryl. Tammy says, I see you're taking your time and not getting frustrated. And Cheryl says, I noticed you're working hard to make those straight. In a way, I would frame both of those comments is you are noticing effort, okay? You're noticing persistence. And that is a powerful move because, first off, when you notice that, it brings it to children's awareness, okay? And then we can talk about effort and persistence. We want kids to be effortful. We want them to be persistent. When we make that visible, then that becomes, in effect, part of the curriculum, okay? Effort and persistence are now part of the curriculum. Taking your time, not getting frustrated, okay? Working hard. The other thing that happens is when you notice those things, that's a big fat affirmation. And when you notice effort, you encourage more effort. Okay. You encourage children to persist. Oh, not getting frustrated. You did that. It fell down and you didn't get frustrated. That's, yeah. And in fact, any of you who may be in Head Start, whoops, or in programs that use the class tool, this is exactly class quality of feedback. When a child is engaged in problem solving, when they're working on something to figure something out, you actually notice not just they did this thing, but how they persisted in it. Okay, the teacher focuses attention on effort and explicitly recognizes students' efforts by saying, "You're really trying." Yeah, that's exactly what you did, right? So thanks for that. So we've got a number of threads going here, and some of these are going to show up later. All right. But so let's just make sure we highlight this idea of describing children's thinking, all right, their process, and describing their actions. Okay. So we've we got a lot going here. Let me get into some more specifics on it. All right. So and those of you that have the 2-page, this is actually outlined on the 2-page here. We're kind of, let's see, we are onto the 2nd page. Right. All right. So we've looked at joining and encouraging. There are things we can do to nudge children's thinking, right? We can invite them to into some places that maybe they wouldn't have been before, like on the when we watch the teacher with the children with the butterflies, and she says, "Oh, I noticed there's one under a leaf," right? She noticed a detail that children hadn't before, and I want to focus on that for just a minute because that's actually a powerful move, and it's not one that always gets done. So let's play with this for a minute, okay? So let's see if you can, let's just get some folks to notice some details in this photo and put them in the chat. What do you notice? Look closely and carefully. Be curious. What do you see? You may be wondering some things too, but what do you see? Stringy things. Oh, so we've got two kinds of things going on here. One is we've got some people trying to name it, right? Like, what is this? This looks like a part of a flower, a sea creature, a stick. okay? And then we've got people describing it, okay? Hairy, stringy things, very strange and slightly fuzzy. Potential roots, they look kind of like roots on the side, right? There's a soft texture in the middle. I want to be really clear that those are two very different kinds of responses. To describe and to name are very different kinds of responses. Okay. I purposely gave you something that was hard for you to name because you had to do some work to describe, right? Like like look right in the middle. Nobody's noticed, is there like a little spiral there? Does it look like that to you? Yeah. Is there a swirl, Jody says, right? Okay. Now, you have seen this hundreds or thousands of times. Not at this magnification, granted, all right? Whoops. But if I had just told you, look at that stem of an apple and tell me what you notice. My guess is we would have gone, oh, it's an apple. What tends to happen is once we can name something, we're done with it. Okay. That is that shows up over and over again for us. A child will walk up to us with something and will say, oh, and we're done. Okay. And a really powerful way to be curious is to let go of the naming and notice the detail. Okay. And in fact, when a child comes up and says to us, what is this? We can say, oh, let's look at it, okay, and describe it. So, oops. Here's something that might happen outside. Okay. Dragonfly lands on the child. Okay. What do we do when that happens? First thing is you have to know dragonflies aren't dangerous. I discovered talking to someone who spent their entire life in New York City that when I showed this image, she was worried for the child's safety. Okay? Dragonflies don't eat anything larger than a mosquito. Right? They're not poisonous. Okay? However, they are kind of amazing, aren't they? So if you're looking at this picture, no, not looking at this picture. If you had this happen outside, okay, child has a dragonfly land on them, what could you notice? What could you say that notices something, that helps that child look more closely and notice details, that sustains their curiosity? Look at those colors. Aren't they incredible? Okay. Have any of you ever painted anything so beautiful, right? Okay. The dragonfly appears to look like glass. Ah, that dragonfly landed on you. What part of its body's touching you? Okay, let's note. It has, oh, there's that vocabulary Cheryl was talking about earlier, right? It has transparent wings. I can see right through its wings. Wow. I can't see through my hand, but we can see through those wings. Your kids would start playing I Spy. Okay. So just what I want to highlight here is that when something happens, we can notice details. We can notice, oh my gosh, if I look closely at this, if I'm looking at the legs, I think those must be the legs that it's holding on with. But look, they have little spiky things on them, like hairs or something. And its body, it's really long and oh, it's darker at the end. And I wonder what that pointy thing is at the end of its body. And when I look at its head, what are those great big, I see great big blue things. Could its eyes be that big? And when I look at it, the main part of its body, am I seeing like Am I looking through its body into its legs? I don't know, right? What I want to highlight here for you, though, is that we can sustain a great deal of curiosity simply by noticing details, but it does mean slowing down. I bet there are 20 things to notice about an apple, right? But we won't notice them because we pick up the apple and we bite it and eat it, and then we're kind of done, all right? So slowing down and noticing detail is a really powerful way to sustain curiosity. Um, yeah, compare the body parts to yours. Yeah, all right. Um, so a couple other things we can do, and some of you folks hinted at some of those. I think the one I want to highlight here is just the open-ended questions. You folks landed on that. Prior experience or knowledge, we can make connections if we've studied other bugs. Huh. When I look at this dragonfly, I remember we were looking at that spider. I wonder what that spider makes us think of when we look at that dragonfly. Oh, yeah, the spider didn't have wings, did it? The body was different too, wasn't it? The spider's body was kind of round and this one's long. So making using prior knowledge to explore new materials and then helping children find answers to their questions, right? So a question we're likely to get is something like, is it a bug? I don't know. How could we find out if it's a bug? How do we know if something's a bug? Oh, maybe we'll have to Google that. What makes something a bug? Okay. Or I wonder why it's on your arm, right? So, what I want to do with you now, and for actually much of our remaining time, is to explore questions. All right. And you folks have asked a lot. And what I've noticed is they've all been some variation or another of open-ended questions, which is where we want to land. And I want to suggest to you that some open-ended questions are going to be more powerful than others because they may help promote more investigation. All right. And in fact, you actually have a single page on different kinds of productive questions. So I'm going to look at some of those with you and think about them with you. They're questions that kind of direct children's thinking. They may focus their attention on elements that you want to explore. Having said that, one of the things that's going on with productive questions is we are taking more of a lead in the exploration. And so I want to just, before we get into them, I want to pause and suggest if a child is deep in exploration, it may not actually be useful or helpful to ask any kind of question, a productive question or any other kind of question, but instead comment on and describe what they're noticing, ask them about their thinking, right? But when it would appear that they might be ready for us to make some kind of other move that stretches their thinking, here we might go. All right. So one kind of productive question is one that's similar to some that some of you have offered already. All right. Questions that describe children's thinking, that ask them about their process, as I called it before. Like a child gets, I think in this instance, what we saw was that the child had been hitting the various pipes with a stick. She went and got a spoon instead. Okay. And the teacher asked her, how did you decide to do that? To use the spoon, right? And what did you think would happen with that spoon? So inviting that child was doing exploration and the adult was in effect surfacing the child's thinking, making our thinking processes visible and part of the curriculum. Okay. For those of you who are like find this interesting, there's actually a marvelous project that you can look up out of. It's actually out of Harvard called the Visible Thinking Project, and there's some really intriguing work they do there to help children notice their own thinking and then use it further. All right. So questions that describe children's thinking. Another way in is questions that invite children to describe their actions, right? This child here had done I don't know if you can see carefully in the photo there, you can see two hollow blocks on the bottom that have well, actually they're transparent, and they have like some colors in them, and he'd arrange the green ones on the bottom, and then he'd put a long kind of magenta one in the middle, and then found two to go along the side. And he'd manipulated this for quite a while to get him to go like that. And the teacher basically asked the child not to describe their thinking, like, how did you come up with this idea, but instead, tell me what you did. Okay. How did you construct this? Okay. What did you do first? What did you do next? Inviting children to describe their sequence of actions, which helps them see how they did problem solving. Okay. Another type of question is questions that help children really focus their attention on things they might not have noticed otherwise. This happened at an easel. And, children are painting at an easel all the time. And usually what we talk about is what they're painting. Okay. What this teacher decided to focus the child's attention on was what happens with the paint in sort of how it interacts with the paper. And she asked the child to notice that sometimes the paint goes on in thick blotches. And then she pointed to a thick blotch. Look how thick it is here, okay? And then she said, and sometimes it's thin and runny, right? And she highlighted a place, and actually it was interesting. The child was using some paint that was thicker and some that was thinner, and they were acting differently on the paper. And the teacher drew the child's attention to that, which then encourages investigations, right? What could we do with the thick paint? What could we do with the thin paint? All right. And then, of course, there's questions that invite predictions. All right. So these children had been building towers with blocks. And she asked, what do you think might happen if we use this block or that block? And then, why do you think so? Inviting them into their thinking. All right. And then, of course, in addition to the adults asking all these questions of these different types, okay, describing thinking, describing actions, asking them to focus their attention, making predictions, children will ask all kinds of questions, right? Okay. These are some questions from children when they were outside. Why are there so many bugs? I love this one. Is the tree happy? What's that? Okay. What's the caterpillar's name? Why did the apples fall off the tree? What do we do with those questions? Thoughts on that? What do we do with those questions? This is the moment where it's possible to feel like, oh, I don't want to do science in my classroom because I don't know the answers. And as Cheryl suggests, we don't need to know the answers, right? Turn them around. What do you think? Why do you think? Right? Maybe have them ask other kids or offer what do they think, right? All three of those are moves there. Explore more to find out, right? All of those are moves to promote curiosity, because the one thing that is sure to end the curiosity is if we answer the question, right? Is the tree happy? No, trees don't have feelings. Okay, we're done, right? Why are there so many bugs? Because it's summer. We're done, right? But what you folks offered, turning the question back to the child, doing more exploration, inviting other children's answers, those are all ways to continue that. And the bottom line there is to be curious together, right? For us to exercise our curiosity as well. And so that's kind of the last place I want to land with us, is to think some about ways that we can join children in curiosity. And hopefully the answer about what are some good opportunities to join children in curiosity is a whole lot of times, and just about any time there's a question, But certainly some activities are probably better at that than others. But I want to encourage this sort of perspective on this. Marian Wright Edelman says you can't be what you can't see, and so if we want children to be curious, then it's up to us to be curious as well, right? The research on curiosity suggests that one of the most powerful things we can do is to model curiosity, right? There was actually an experiment that was done with some in a sort of lab setting with children where they would do an activity, and then after the activity, this was the experiment part, was either one of two things would happen. Either the teacher would just clean up, okay, that's condition one, or the teacher would say, I wonder what would happen if we did this. It was, I don't know if you know that bouncing raisin experiment. They were doing the bouncing raisin one, and at the end of it, the teacher would just clean up, or the teacher would say, I wonder what would happen if we dropped Skittles in instead. And what they saw was that afterwards, in the conditions where the adults had modeled curiosity, guess what the kids did, right? They had that modeled for them. They had permission given too, right? So when we say things like, I wonder what would happen if, then kids do it too, all right? So I want to leave you with a last little moment here. This is a children's book on wolf snails. Who knew there was such a thing as wolf snails, right? So I'm going to read you a couple pages. The wolf snail glides along the ground until it comes to the stem of a hosta plant. It climbs up. Does the wolf snail bite into a crisp hosta leaf? No. Most land snails, such as this one, eat plants. The wolf snail eats meat. But what's going to happen next? All right. So you'll have to find the book, or you can just wonder what might happen. So let's take just a moment and think about nurturing our own disposition for curiosity. And I want to just offer this. Schools can have an awful lot of rules. Preschools have to get licensed. We have standards we're accountable for. There is so much that sort of takes us into a compliance mindset. And I want to just offer us, what would it look like for us to really nurture a culture of curiosity among the adults, okay? Inside our teaching teams, with our coaches, at our staff meetings, with our families. And I know there are a lot of challenges to that, and it's probably worth naming them. Okay? But I want to suggest that it is possible for us to lead with curiosity. As an adult, curiosity is the great antidote to judgment. If instead of making a judgment about a thing or a person, we get curious, that changes everything, right? So I want to encourage you to maybe consider 3 intentions, whichever parts of them might be useful for you. One is just, what's the message you want students to receive about curiosity, okay? What do you want them to sort of think and feel, right, about being curious? Then the second would be, so then what are the actions you can take to help promote that sense among students? And then finally, if it's true that curious children have their curiosity promoted by curious adults, what might we do among ourselves as early educators to strengthen our own dispositions towards curiosity. And I think with that, oh my gosh, 5:29. That never happens. All right. Let me just offer a moment if people have questions, comments. This would have been delightful to do in person and play, but thank you for making this work, hopefully for you in this format. Please be in touch if that is at all useful. And thank you for being curious adults with children.